Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, depending on where you're tuning in from. Thanks so much for joining us on day one of Financial Inclusion Week 2022. I'm Alex Rizzi, and I'll be your host for the next 59 minutes and 40 seconds or so as I moderate our global plenary on translating privacy by design for inclusive finance. I'm joined today by three fantastic panelists from three different time zones who each bring a unique perspective and experience on privacy and privacy by design. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist, Thea Anderson from Omidyar Network, couldn't make it today due to a family emergency, but we'll be posting some of the resources that she sent us along in the chat during the session. And you'll hear from the other three fantastic panelists in a few minutes, but I'd first like to say a few words on who I am and frame the topic for today. As I mentioned, I'm Alex Rizzi, a senior director at the Center for Financial Inclusion, where I lead a research portfolio around responsible data practices. We've conducted research on responsible algorithms, surveyed consumers to understand their attitudes towards the use of their data and privacy, and most recently began to understand the potential for privacy by design for inclusive finance. And I'd say a through line in our work is an articulation of the data-related challenges that low-income financial consumers face, combined with work to find solutions and approaches to help meet those challenges. So back to the plenary. I'd wager that most of us attending Financial Inclusion Week are very excited about the ways that consumer digital data, advanced analytics, and data sharing are intersecting in new business models, products, and opportunities for the underserved. I think the pandemic put some of those trends and intersections into even starker relief. We saw unprecedented onboarding into digital finance in emerging markets during COVID. And we also saw during COVID how digital data trails like mobile wallet transactional history could provide valuable real-time insights into how consumers and businesses were faring financially in a way that traditional data just couldn't. And even as these factors help to drive financial access, we believe that trust remains a critical ingredient to translate that progress into sustained gains for consumers. And one of the spaces that consumer trust can be built or broken is in privacy. We know from research that when consumers fall victim to privacy-related harms, the experience makes it harder for them to trust and use digital finance to its full extent. Privacy harms for low-income consumers are unfortunately not uncommon. We've seen digital lending apps inappropriately using borrower contacts to bombard their friends and family with threats or pleas, or even in some cases, fake graphic images of the borrowers. Or we've seen the fallout from deceptively designed user interfaces, such as an edtech in India that misused parents' biometric information to lock them into loans that they hadn't even signed up for. So I just wanted to get the pulse of the room in terms of how the attendees and the audience are feeling so about this issue. And so we're putting into the chat a question to ask you all on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. How concerned are you with the implications of privacy harms for the trust and usage of digital finance? So we'll see how optimistic, you can just put it right in the chat, and we'll see how optimistic people are feeling, or perhaps not, or if people are still on the fence. So we'll just wait a minute for those scores to come in. And so it seems like people are, quite a few scores between 7 and 10. So folks are, maybe there's a bit of a self-selection for the people who are attending this session, that they are more concerned about the implications of privacy harms on trust and usage of digital finance. So I think a lot of us are on the same page. So, of course, data protection regulation has helped mitigate a lot of these risks, with the GDPR in Europe leading the way in defining how personal data can and can't be used, in emphasizing informed consent and promoting new digital rights. But in our view, it can also lead to an approach towards privacy where it becomes more of a check the box compliance exercise rather than something that is positioned as a trust enhancing or even business enhancing endeavor. And particularly for the consumers that many of us aim to serve, the rapid pace of digitalization has made the limits of informed consent quite clear. Corporate privacy notices in general are not often written with the end users in mind, particularly users with digital or financial literacy constraints. And the way most digital privacy related choices are framed is consent is offered as a kind of take it or leave it approach. And beyond choice and consent, I believe it is critical in our field to also think about how onboarding into digital finance could replicate or even inflame offline privacy risks, particularly for vulnerable groups like women. Existing discrimination or social norms against women could lead them to face higher risks online around surveillance, targeted violence, or the misuse of personal images and data. So these privacy needs clearly go beyond compliance. Enter privacy by design. It was originally framed by a Canadian privacy commissioner, Dr. Anne Cavoukian, in 2009 as a way to embed privacy as a core element of any IT system or product, not as something that's added on. Her framework calls for privacy considerations to start at the ideation phase and be maintained throughout the product lifecycle, for users to be centered in how a company practices privacy, for privacy to be the default option, and for companies' privacy choices to be transparent and clear, among other principles. And we liked what we were hearing with this approach. But as we thought about how it might look in our field, there weren't too many examples, and we had a lot of questions. Privacy by design reframes privacy as a core value proposition to consumers. And we've seen companies like Apple or Signal positioning privacy as a big part of their brand. We wondered, what does this look like in practice, and does it actually work in building trust and usage? Privacy by design implies a deep collaboration between privacy teams and product teams made up of engineers, data scientists, UX, UI designers, who might have different incentives. And how does that work? How to make that work in practice? And while some firms in more developed countries have embraced privacy by design, we wondered what it could look for organizations with fewer resources, working in markets where they're serving low-income and vulnerable consumers, and in environments with perhaps limited enforcement capacity from data protection regulators. So what do we need to know? We had a lot of questions about how to translate this approach, this promising approach of privacy by design for our field. And I love that as a moderator, I get to ask all these big thorny questions, and then I don't have to answer any of them. And I get to turn to the panelists for their insights. So I'd love to start our panel discussion with perhaps first just a quick introductions from Kevin, then Mark and Udbav. So maybe each of you could take a minute to introduce yourselves, and then also a minute to answer sort of an ice-breaking lightning round, which is, what do you see as sort of the biggest challenge around consumer privacy and digital finance, particularly for vulnerable and low-income consumers? And so, and after those intros, we'll dig into more questions with each of our expert panelists. So, and just to say to the audience, please, throughout the panel, post your chats and questions, and we'll aim to get to all of those later. So perhaps Kevin, then Mark and Udbav.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's evening where I am. I'm in South Africa this week. My name is Kevin Mutiso. I wear two hats. I'm the chairman of the Digital Financial Services Association of Kenya, and we represent the digital lending industry, when we have 9%, our members represent 9% of market share, 91% is the bank, so we're the biggest piece after the banks. And we're famous for leading the conversation around progressive regulation both for the data protection side, but also for the consumer protection on digital credit here in Kenya. The other hat I wear is that I'm also CEO of a fintech startup called Oye, where we provide, we empower the boda boda riders. So boda boda riders in Kenya are the motorbike taxi riders. If you've been to Africa or Southeast Asia, I'm sure you've seen many. What is the biggest challenge, I think, particularly to the informal communities that we serve, informal sector entrepreneurs that we serve? I think it's consumer education. I think there's a lack of understanding of what kinds of data are collected, what the data is used for, and the benefits that has and the negative implications that that could have. As a result, we see people taking advantage of these users or customers when they're asking for data. I was trying to make sure I'm in 3 minutes. So I hope that's good.
Perfect. Thanks, Kevin. Mark?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark. Thanks for having me to add some thoughts here. As said, Mark Placzek is my name. I'm the chief of PayPal. I'm based here in the Bay Area at the headquarters of PayPal. I'm heading the data privacy, global privacy program, but also data management. Actually, what Kevin just said is part two. And talking about this, I actually need to commit that he stole my thunder a little bit there. I totally agree that the biggest challenge is like of what is happening in the days in the background when it comes to data. So do you think that customers easily get confused and maybe are also a little bit scared and how much they have to disclose in order actions or money movement through the system? Just imagine, I mean, it's not, you know, which you can hide under your mattress, like a digital space. You will just to understand how this is now moving with all discloses about you. I believe is one of the biggest challenges, because ultimately, if happening in the background, this creates trust. The customer trusts you, then you can basically targeted products, for example. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And Udbhav?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Udbhav Tiwari, and I work for the Mozilla Corporation as the head of global product policy. As a part of my job, I fundamentally work with both entities within the Mozilla Corporation, but as well as the Mozilla Foundation to speak to regulators around the world for how they could, for how they can draft laws that both create opportunities and defend Mozilla's own products, but also like imbibe Mozilla's manifesto. One of the most important principles in which is the fact that privacy and security online are fundamental and should not be treated as optional. So as a part of that, I've been involved in conversations around data governance and privacy in multiple jurisdictions. And I think like from those experiences, as well as from the rest of my career, the biggest challenge personally, according to me, when it comes to financial inclusion and vulnerable populations is the risk of worsening existing inequalities. There is a very real chance that because of certain notions or ideas of how privacy should be implemented that may very well be true for certain societies are blanketly adopted in other jurisdictions, sometimes without necessarily understanding local contexts and ways and awareness that may exist in certain populations can actually lead to existing scenarios of either discrimination or lack of financial access that sometimes technology can actively make worse than how had originally existed in the physical, so to say, world. And that's a risk that from certain experiences that I've seen play out in India, such as those around India's digital identity project, the Aadhaar, as well as the ongoing process of our own data protection bill, which has been now delayed for quite some time. I think poses that there is both a lot of work that I think went into making sure those things were better, and some of that happened, but also a lot that didn't happen. And I think there's a pretty urgent need to make sure that those lessons are propagated around the world as much as possible, so everyone can learn from those experiences. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Udbhav. So yeah, it's great to hear all of those reflections and kind of common themes on how we see the risks, the privacy risks, and the implications of those risks of worsening inequality or kind of lessening of trust. So Mark, I wanted to turn to you to learn more about how PayPal approaches privacy by design. Your enterprise, PayPal is connecting more than 30 million merchants with almost 400 million active consumers across, I think, close to 200 markets. And in addition to payments, PayPal's also offering high yield savings through bank partnerships, the ability to transfer and receive cryptocurrency. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of consumer data. There's a lot of different products and features. So we'd love to hear from your vantage point how PayPal thinks about this idea, this concept of privacy by design at an enterprise level.
Thanks. Happy to talk a little bit about that, and I hope Anthony. So we really embrace this whole privacy by, because we truly believe that you can make privacy and real a differentiator in a good way. Privacy by design for us basically means that you have one privacy team sitting checking if everything is okay, like we compliant that earlier, but rather try this idea of privacy by embedded in any function and business have at PayPal, no matter what the organization. So we're not only talking the consumer marketing area, and even HR rules, apply the same way. So for us, the most important to sit at everyone's beginning of conversations with lines and make sure that the required perspective are articulated up front, but not only, rather to be seen as something with added value, in the build of a. So if you work with data, more data to make things happen, at least think about the borders you face along the way, right? Not only purposes, but sometimes also to understand what you. So in the beginning of these privacy programs and this approach, I found it quite interesting that they're still also talking about privacy by somehow a subset of this privacy by design. And that goes into the same direction. You want to stand up a clear privacy approach, let's make sure that privacy by design included. Because privacy by design means build product systems in a way that people have options. By default will tell you, well, and always friendly option first and choose what they want to do. And that's the then ultimately try the whole privacy by design systems and what we basically did is main pillars of these of the so-called privacy impact means, but we have assessments implemented in whatever PayPal. So be it the product build or vendor onboarding, it's there which has to be filled in by the people, the process which they want to build. Privacy team can assess the risks and also give advice of how we can make it easier. And then to some extent, mainly done for the customer, bring it to a point that we can have our say when, user interface design, that it's designed in a way that customers understand it, that they have an option whether they don't want to use something, and ultimately to be forgotten if you don't want to use, how can you get out of it? So this famous knowing of consent, which is part of it, and we tried to leverage as much processes that are already in place. For those companies who are not as big yet, and they want to build a framework which is, say, not entirely an assignment to find out what processes are, and then use them to integrate a process or even incident management processes, etc., into that. A lot of time, and it saves you a lot of. Ultimately, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and your employees will also know already they are working with. This is nothing that we do in the background, so the communication, and there's a lot going back and forth between functions in order to get this stood up.
Great. I think Mark, we're having a little trouble hearing you. So I think we can come back. Maybe would love to kind of dig into maybe a specific example to hear about some of the ways that that PayPal's approach this. Maybe Udbhav would love to hear. 'Cause I think at Mozilla, Mozilla currently has something, I'm sure you have more accurate numbers, something over 300 million users, in terms of Mozilla Firefox. And at least I've seen, I've perceived Mozilla's kind of brand identity, or they've really positioned themselves and positioned privacy as a part of its brand identity and a value proposition to consumers. I wondered if you could talk a bit about how Mozilla has thought about privacy as a value proposition and how that's evolved and kind of what that looks like in practice.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. I think that at Mozilla, the privacy, ever since the project really kicked off in the early 2000s, was always a very fundamental aspect of our DNA. And it's been something that both when it comes to user-facing opportunities and ways in which our consumers interact with our products, as well as in internal processes, I think that we've both done a lot, but it's also been a very interesting journey, because if you'd asked me the conversation, like the question, say, about 15 years ago, I think my answer would have been that we don't collect any data in Firefox, like at all, right? So the thinking there was, especially at that, at the beginning of the project, and also because of how small it was, that like a lot of the things that are considered essential for any product to be successful, telemetry data, information that talks about how users interact with certain pages, what websites are not working for them, all of course in the privacy preserving way, was simply not collected at all. But as we matured and grew as an organization, I think it became pretty clear that a lot of this information was going to be necessary for us to collect in order to be able to improve our product and effectively compete in the marketplace. But we decided to take that same principle or thinking, which had led to us not deciding to collect this telemetry and a lot of this other information when it comes to privacy, and apply it to how we collect this data as well. And I think that that's very much been an ongoing process, but there certainly are certain, I would say, like key principles that we keep in mind as like when we go about doing this collection. The first is, I think, making sure that our users do not have a difficult time understanding what we're doing and have the choice and the ability to be able to select and choose the experiences in the data collection that they want to be a part of, right? It's something that we believe that elsewhere in the space, it's traditionally been something that you either need to be like a UI UX designer who's intimately familiar with the product to be able to really make the exact choices and changes that you want. And we, for example, when you install Firefox for the first time, like we open up, prompts that say what kind of data collection you would be okay with. We open up privacy policy, right, which we've also made sure is written and designed in a manner that it can be more generally understood as well. And which is like one aspect of it, to making sure that like we collect only exactly what we need, that we get informed consent at every single stage. And in some instances, we have decided that there's some data that is simply too sensitive to collect, right? So for example, all your browsing history within Firefox is synchronized between your devices using end-to-end encryption. That means that even if, say, our systems were to be compromised, or we were to get a request saying, give this information about this particular user, we would not have the keys to their browsing history to be able to do so. And that's because we treat browsing history to be sensitive, and therefore information that should not be be on our servers or on our systems at all. And any processing that we do with it only happens on the devices of individuals in practice, right? So that, I think all of those are examples of ways in which either using external facing practices or by using security measures like end-to-end encryption are simply not collecting certain data that is very important while collecting other pieces of information that make it much easier for users to be able to both make a choice, but also let us improve our products. And there's a lot of sort of documentation around this. The process that we followed while arriving at these decisions was one that we worked on with our community, which because we're one of the sort of largest open source projects, and it's something that we've always tried to be as open and collaborative in as possible. And I think that in each of those stages, there are many lessons that can be applied to many projects around the world in the financial inclusion space as well. When it comes to internal practices, there are a couple of things that I think that I'd like to highlight. The first is Mozilla internally actually has this thing called a data stewardship program, where unlike the rest of unlike many other organizations where privacy is of course by law just a compliance function, where there is a big staff of individuals whose job it is to make sure certain things are done in a proper way, which of course Mozilla also has and we also follow. We also have this thing called a data stewardship program that lets individuals elsewhere in the organization become data stewards. And that means that internally within their teams or within their broader organizations, people can approach them for advice and for help on privacy questions that they may be thinking about. Is it okay to collect this information? Is it not okay to collect this information? If we do, is there ways to collect it in a more privacy preserving way so we can get the value without necessarily associating it with user identity? And the data stewardship program has actually, I think, both helped imbibe an internal culture of privacy in an organization where it's not just specific teams and organizations that think about it, but everybody in a way, as a part of coming into the organization in the first place, thinks about it. And some people almost serve as community leaders within the company, and they don't necessarily have to be engineers, right? We've had UI UX designers, we've had legal team, there are people in different in the marketing team who all play this role as well. And that's been, I would say, one of the more interesting ways in which over the last couple of years we've engaged on some of these questions. And the second is definitely if one just, for example, Google's Mozilla's data privacy principles and see the links that turn up, I think that you'd find a lot of our thinking around these topics is actually publicly explained in great granular detail, right? I don't want to go into the principles and sort of read them out here, but the criteria by which internal reviews take place, a program that we run externally called Lean Data Practices, which is about taking Mozilla's approach on how we deal with data and bringing it to other organizations around the world, which we've done in India, which we've done in Kenya and United States and a bunch of other countries, are all ways in which we are trying to come up with a framework around how we do our thinking and make sure that that is also publicly available, so it's easy to be adopted, not just by corporations, but by nonprofits, government departments, research organizations, and we have templates and guides that do that as well. And we treat that as a really important way of spreading awareness about these topics. In terms of consumer demand, I would say that that there has been a sea change in the last 10 to 12 years, right? Our overall both positioning within the market, where while we have thought that privacy is important for quite some time, the importance of privacy being a competitive advantage or a competitive differentiator between your products is definitely something that we've seen consumers pick up a lot on, right? And this is by no means just restricted to markets in Western Europe or markets in the United States, but in around the world, where in fact, many of our users come from markets, countries and regions that are not a part of the markets I mentioned earlier. And across the board, both the questions that we get asked, right? So if we launch a feature and we say this is going to happen with data, the amount of engagement we get from our community and from users, why is this happening? Can it be explained better? Like that's definitely increased, which I think showcases and demonstrates that people are tangibly not just more aware about their privacy, but also know how to engage with it much more. And if you give them the opportunity to do that, that can actually be used to improve your own product and services. And the way that things stand right now, I think that like, especially over the last 3 years, with Apple's app tracking transparency measures and a bunch of other things that have actually taken place, like it's pretty clear that certain aspects of like consumer-facing privacy practices are now very much mainstream. Some of this, of course, has to do with the laws of like GDPR and other things that have led to organizations thinking about how they should like answer these difficult questions. But many of them, I think, are also because there is a market for a lot of these services, and being able to provide services without necessarily risking people's privacy is becoming quite the business as well. And finally, just on like how privacy matters across different markets and jurisdictions, like I think that it's the point that I made earlier as well. It's very sometimes it can be very convenient to be able to dismiss privacy, as and it's something that we've actually seen happen. I mean, in India, for example, and in other places as well, where people say like, no, privacy is such like an elite Western concept, right? Like everybody in this country like gives their passports away, like to their local SIM card dealer anyway, so we don't really care about privacy. Or the fact that there are other places in the world where it's like if privacy is almost always posed as a trade-off between convenience, and the convenience that it provides in certain markets, in certain scenarios, is like overrides the notional idea of why it should or should not be there. And I think that like those things are not just pretty wrong, they've actually been looked into like by researchers, by courts, in fact, in India as well, and have been overtly dismissed. Like the idea that like privacy may have different meanings and manifestations in different people, like regions according to local context, is I think one thing, but to say that it's not existent as an idea is, I think, like largely a narrative that's been crafted with a pretty exploitative mindset rather than an enabling mindset. And for all of these entities that do make these arguments, I think that there is a lot of merit in them, like instead just investing those time and resources and doing a good job of implementing privacy practices, and a lot like and therefore using it as a way not just to build trust with their existing users, but also use that as an opportunity to expand into different markets. Because it's not to say it's an easy problem, but if it's a hard problem to solve, but once you solve it, there's a lot of potential to do great things with it too.
Great. Thanks so much, Bob. It's really interesting to hear both about kind of the data steward program inside Mozilla and kind of how privacy by design is being approached internally, but also how you're responding or seeing kind of responsiveness from consumers to investments or kind of consumer-facing privacy features and improvements. Before we turn to Kevin, where I am very excited to hear all about kind of how the market in Kenya has evolved. I want to just turn back to Mark just to give him an opportunity, hopefully the connection's a bit better, just to talk maybe about a specific instance in how PayPal has worked with product team, or the privacy and product teams have worked together to kind of use the privacy enhancement as a trust building moment for its consumers. So hopefully the connection's a bit better, Mark, but just want to turn it back to you for a quick follow-up before turning to Kevin.
Right, so let's make this real interactive. Alex, I apologize, but can you hear me better now?
Yes, great.
Okay, perfect. So to the audience, I really apologize. I don't know where this came from, but I hope now it'll be better and won't get bad again. So as mentioned earlier, I actually just talked quickly through how we approach this privacy by design and how close we want to be to the different business units and functions in order to build, products and processes that are easy to understand and easy to use for customers as well. Because with this easiness and understanding of the tools you have at hand, it increases trust with the customer, and then most likely, customers are more keen on using your products than probably, competition's products. So one of the examples I just quickly wanted to highlight is, and it goes a little bit also to what was said earlier, is that, you know, privacy, yes, it comes and it stems from privacy laws, and that's probably why we all got started there. And yes, it was maybe in Canada, like these were all the like this was the time where it was kicked off. But soon enough you find out, you know, that even if you don't have a legal requirement in market that you have to do something, there are just things you can do which customers really appreciate. And for us at PayPal, for example, that was the automation of all these data subject rights that you see in privacy frameworks. So not all privacy frameworks, for example, either because there is nothing like a privacy framework or they don't have it, sees data access requests. You know, you have to provide data of your specific or of the individual to that individual upon request. This is something where we saw, okay, if everyone understands this right, you know, the volume of those requests will go up. So what can we do about it to make sure that this is a real easy process, and also for our customer an easy way, you know, to do and to understand. So we worked with the team, and that again goes back to that you have to be, you know, very close to all of the employees in a company. So for this specifically, we worked very closely with customer service, very closely with our engineering and platform teams, and as well as others, to build an automated solution where customer can go into their profile where they're already authenticated, and then click on a link and request their personal data. And the platform is able to execute within, I think we're down to 48 hours now, if I'm not mistaken. So it goes really, really quickly. While we in the beginning always struggled, you know, with the intake channel, and then how much time do we have? Is it 30 days in GDPR and 15 days in a different market, etc.? And that was something where we saw a lot of value and also got incredibly good feedback from our customer, really telling us, oh, wow, this is really easy and I didn't even know that I can do it. And let's face it, now where it's automated, it is also not a cost factor, right? Like people can do it whenever they want to do it, and the platform can support. While, you know, earlier it was a very manual exercise, and each of these requests which came in was also time of customer service agents or tech teams to find this data. So that was one of the things where we saw a big advantage in building that. And I think that also increased a lot of the trust in PayPal that we're taking the whole framework serious, and that we're even rolling it out to areas where potentially we wouldn't necessarily need to do so. I hope everyone understood what I was saying.
Yes, clear as a bell. That was clear as a bell, Mark. Thank you so much. And I'm definitely, yeah, really interesting to hear about the data subject requests. And I think I'm going to go into my PayPal app after this and test that out too. And how it's, I think it also represents kind of the savviness, sort of what Bob was talking about, that customers are aware of these rights that they have and are taking advantage of an opportunity to understand how, you know, how their providers are using their data, what information they have on them. So and that can help build trust. So that was a great example. Kevin, I wanted to end the discussion with you to kind of ground some of the concepts that we've been talking about, privacy and privacy by design in a very specific market, and with you know, specific business models. Kenya has been at the vanguard of digital finance and innovation, but also sometimes we've seen some privacy and consumer risks emerging as well. And so would love to hear from your role at the helm of the Digital Financial Services Association for Kenya, how you've dealt with the challenges that we've seen, that many of us have seen around digital lending and data privacy, and what that evolution has looked like, how you've worked with your members, what risks consumers have faced. So would love to hear that story.
Thanks, Alex. Well, so the Digital Financial Services Association of Kenya was formed in 2019 and was originally known as the Digital Lenders Association of Kenya. Now, at the time, the big issue was that we had several digital lenders who were not following sort of best practice when it came to data protection. In addition to that, we did not have a law. So we didn't have anything like GDPR or PDPA. and it was being debated in Parliament. So at the time, what we did is we set up a code of conduct that basically set out the parameters that digital lenders should use for data collection, data use, and educating the customer on what they're going to use the data on. This was actually quite successful, as we were able to sign up 25 of the big lenders, and that's actually how we ended up having the association getting to be as influential as it has become today. In addition to that, we were able to reject a couple of proposed members on the basis that they would flaunt a lot of the rules or regulations we had set in the Data Protection Act. Following that, the DPA, Data Protection Act 2019, was passed in Kenya, and the Office of the Data Commissioner formed. As a result of that, we started working very closely with that office. It was set up in 2021. They appointed a data commissioner, and now we have a fully fledged enforcement team within the data commissioner's office that we work with together when there are complaints. So they have a complaints mechanism, and then they let us know some of those complaints. And in fact, recently, 2 weeks ago, they released one of the first public statements around data protection and sent out audits on various lenders in the industry. In addition to that, we have had what we call rogue, sort of harmful debt collection practices by rogue lenders. This is where you see customers' numbers, contact details being picked up, and pastors, mothers, daughters, sisters are being reached out to by these lenders in a very negative way. And we've seen instances of mental health issues being exacerbated by this. In fact, the central bank governor of Kenya actually got a complaint from a widow who had lost her husband due to a suicide as a result of some of these harmful debt collection practices. What we did with that, and that was crazy in terms of volume in 2018, 2019, but it got really bad in 2020 and 2021. I myself was receiving at least 20 complaints a day from various on my social media, on our website. And of course, the association as well has a complaints portal, and we're getting hundreds a week. What we decided to do was take another approach where we worked with various stakeholders within the private sector, namely the telcos, where we would receive complaints. And the reason we worked with the telcos is that the telcos are the M-Pesa is the disbursement tool and receiving tool for most digital lenders. Therefore, understanding what pay bills they are using to receive and disburse these loans was essential for us. And what we found out was quite surprising. Several of these rogue digital lenders weren't even registered as lenders. So they were using pay bills for restaurants, wines and spirits, supermarkets. And that gave us grounds to switch them off, so that those lenders then could not have access or were not able to continue with business in this unfair way. The good thing is I can report that by combination of what the Data Commissioner's Office is doing, some of these partnerships in the private sector, what we're doing, the complaints have come down to about 1 a month. And that's a good thing. It's an amazing thing. I think it's a big win for the industry. Parallel to that whole story, there was the what we call the Digital Credit Providers Act, which we actively lobbied for, where we ensured that the consumer protection principles were adhered to. So similar to those that were in the Code of Conduct, we also tried to ensure that it was captured well in the law. And this mainly focused again on the debt collection aspects, which have a direct correlation with the data privacy. So those are some of the big wins we've had. We now have 288 applications at the central bank for digital lenders. They've issued 10 licenses so far. We're expecting another 15 this week. And as we go along, the law states that the central bank has 60 days from the day they receive an application to either approve or reject a licensee, but the licensee the proposed licensee can continue lending up until the point the CBK actually says you're not approved to do this business. So those are some of the big things that have happened in the industry.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kevin, for sharing that evolution. It seems like a combination of kind of regulatory pressure and industry efforts have really aimed to kind of clean up some of the bad practices. I'm wondering from the consumer side, we've been talking about this, the idea of privacy by design as a value differentiator, a brand kind of differentiator. Do you feel that Kenyan consumers in kind of a crowded space are able to kind of distinguish between privacy practices of different lenders for those that go above and beyond? Are they rewarded in some way, in terms of customer retention? How are consumers perceiving the improved privacy improvements?
Well, I think the big thing is for those brands that are perceived to respect privacy, they have the best repayment rates in the market. Why? Because the customer wants to ensure that they always have access to those products when they need them, because they're so reliable. And when things get thick, they don't go through the horrendous experience of having their pastor or grandmother or their boss being called. So that has had a very positive impact for some of my members who are known for this, because they're much larger. And then, of course, there's a product known as Fuliza, which is a bank-led product, and actually one of the most innovative digital financial services products ever. And what you find is that a lot of customers always ensure that their Fuliza is paid on time. Then those that struggle know that, they have some breathing room in the sense of they won't be harassed. And so when they do get money, they pay that loan as well immediately to make sure that their limits remain. So that's what has happened to the brands. When it comes to privacy by design, one of the key things we are trying to work on is ensuring that express consent is understood so when the apps are asking for specific data sets, which include things like M-Pesa statements or access to your contact details or access to your phone records, they're making it very clear what that data is going to be used for and why that data is important in scoring for the loan. I think those are the main highlights I could give.
Yeah, that's really interesting that, as you're saying, sort of the value of feeling like, that a consumer won't be harassed, that their privacy won't be violated is a very, of having that is quite high and would kind of lead them to be even better customers, or, and make sure they don't lose access to a service that they know is going to treat them well from a privacy perspective. That's really interesting. I want to, make sure that we also have time to answer some questions from the audience. A few have come in. I think one from our friend at the Digital Credit Observatory, Dan Casara, and he's asking, has been kind of listening to privacy as a value proposition, and wondering if the panelists could speak a bit more to how they view the trade-off between providing value to consumers around privacy versus the value to their companies of data that isn't being used, perhaps, or even collected. And so maybe this tension between, something like data minimization and kind of the potential value of that data. So maybe we could go down maybe Mark, Udbhav, and Kevin, if you'd also like to comment on that too.
I'm happy to go first, as long as you can hear me, of course.
Yes.
But I think that's a super interesting question. And I think it all comes back to the fact that technology is evolving so fast and we can do so many things and collect so much data that we tend to get lazy to think about if it's necessary and useful in the first place. So sometimes when I'm being asked this question, I would love to turn it upside down and say, show me what you get through or get off the data that you collected more than we told you to do so versus what you can do with the data that you're allowed to collect. So I don't know if this is really always true that you can do so many things more with collecting more. Like in the end, it all comes down to over collection, right? And many things that we want to do with the data, we can do with the data that we had collected already, if it fits the purpose, of course. And you don't necessarily need all the data because let's face it, from a data management perspective, data is also a risk. I mean, the more you hold, the riskier it is in case there is a breach or so. So I'm not sure if it's the right approach. I think what we need to do is think about it in a different way, rather saying like, look, for this purpose or for this project, I need this set of data attributes. How can we make it happen, to collect it and use it?
Great, thanks, Mark. Udbhav, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I actually, I think like a little bit of an extension of the point that Mark's making about the utility of data, which is, even within Mozilla, like that, it's definitely something that resonates very strongly. It's the first thing in the lean data principles that we talk about externally, for example, is be lean. And lean does not mean don't collect data, but it says only collect the data that you need and want. And you can like showcase a demonstrated need for, and it's stunning when we have conversations with other organizations, just how much of a gap sometimes there is between the data that's actually being connected and the data that's actually useful, to teams internally to achieve the goals that they want. But like the point that I would make is, I think that there are lots of ways of, I think the term data collection probably can have different meanings now, right? And I think with a lot of the work that Mozilla is doing in like sort of related but adjacent field, like privacy preserving advertising, has really served as, I think, an eye opener to us about what are the potential ways of being able to collect insights and collect information without actually associating it with individuals at all, right? Like removing a lot of the risks that is inherent with massive data collection, but also making it something that like even if you do take all the precautions, if something goes wrong, the consequences of that are not as harsh or as bad as what they would have been if you would have directly collected the information from them. So I think that it's something that in certain aspects of the internet ecosystem is becoming more and more common and more popular. But as we go forward, I think that the potential for that to improve and for a lot of other sectors, including, I think, the fintech space in general, are quite high. Like, of course, you will always need to, get the names of individuals, and if you're opening a bank account, they will have to share sensitive information with you. So it's not to say that like there is a world in which one may not have to collect that information. It's much more about the sort of information that apps are able to collect about day-to-day interactions that sometimes may not just be unnecessary, but like the parts that you do need to collect, you can collect in a manner that don't end up necessarily associating it with individuals. So advocating, I guess, for technical solutions to some of these problems rather than just process ones, and making sure those technical solutions there's widespread awareness about them and like they become as easy to implement as possible will go a very long ways.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Udbhav. Kevin, would you like to add any thoughts, kind of some of these how you think about the trade-offs?
In digital lending, the interesting insight is that the more data we get, the better we are able to score customer. And so the main trade-off for us is how much data can we collect without affecting the relationship with the customer. and how much data is enough to start the process of issuing the loan, because once the repayment data starts coming in, that's the most important data set anyway, right? So it's usually for that initial phase of the customer interaction, building trust with the customer. And so the main thing is, the main question is, how do we ensure we keep trust with the customer for the long term? And so that's what I'd say about that.
Okay. Great, thank you. I know we're getting close to time, and so I think there were a few other questions as well, but perhaps we can ask, we can make sure we follow up afterwards. Just maybe as one last kind of lightning round, if there was, and maybe keep it to a minute or so, if there's kind of a development in the privacy space, whether it's kind of privacy preserving technology or other approaches, or that you feel, that you're excited about in terms of its ability to help, bring, implement privacy by design and make it workable, or, particularly in the fintech space, would love your thoughts, anything that you're excited about or hopeful for in the coming years. So maybe we can go Kevin, Mark, Udbhav. Back to you, Kevin.
So I'm not plugging, but I'm working on a startup called Kamoa, where we're trying to create a scoring tool for customers to be proud of, so that they can use that score when they go to lenders and get financing. And what we've done is we've already invited financiers to start lending to these customers using our credit scoring model. Why I'm excited about it is because it's a very novel approach to accessing digital finance in Kenya. So we've seen a lot of solutions that are sort of, I'll call them off the rack. What this is that I'm a customer, I'm not so sure what I want. We've done all the hard work. We've done all the vetting of the customer, we've done the credit scoring of the customer, but we've also done the vetting of the lenders and the different types of, and we've done a curation of products that you may or may not want. And the idea there is that the customer only sends data to us, and then once they choose the lender, then that specific lender is the only one that gets that data. Why that's exciting is that the customer doesn't need to send data to 20 different lenders by downloading 20 different apps. And so that's what I'm working on that, and it's very exciting, and we're seeing some very positive results actually. Yeah. Great, thanks, Kevin. And we can also, if there's a website, or we'd be happy to post if there's anything you want to share about that business model and the startup. So thanks so much, Kevin. And Mark, things you're excited about, trends in the privacy space?
Yeah, Alex, I mean, you mentioned already all these pet discussions, so privacy enhancing technologies or preserving technologies, whatever we want to call it. I think they are really interesting and worth to follow. However, what keeps me busy there, and also what excites me a little bit, is actually to learn more about how you can use it in an environment, like in a big company environment, because the solutions always in itself, they look super promising, but so far it's always pretty hard to implement it in common companies. So you could do, you can have kind of like a dry run with one specific database or so, but it's never this all-encompassing great solution which you can just, deploy, and then you're on the safe side. So that's definitely something where I will be on the lookout for more information and for more actually the technologies to evolve so that they are easier to use in an environment like PayPal's.
Great, thanks so much, Mark. And I also wonder, to kind of the applicability of some of those of Pet's privacy enhancing technology at kind of smaller startups in terms of the resources and cost of those. So yeah, that's definitely a fast moving space. Udbhav, you have the last word, I think.
I mean, I think that a little bit around what Mark touched as well, but maybe like a specific aspect of that. I mean, I think that personally for me, especially in the financial inclusion space, this idea that you need to collect data in order to say do scoring, and you do a lot of these insights as right now necessarily centralized functions. There are functions that you share data with the provider aggregates them and then runs processing on them to arrive at certain insights. But I think that for certain aspects, by no means all, on-device processing is actually like the one that it is at Mozilla we're trying to use a lot in our products, and a lot of those other use cases that I'm aware about in other sectors also hold great potential. Because just for example, to take the credit score example, right, rather than all your information being collected and being shared with the lender in order for them to do that processing, what if what the lender does is builds the system around which this would take place, but depending on the kind of devices that are available, lets those systems run on the device. So rather than your information having to like leave your system, go to another vendor, be open to risks and other potential outcomes, like it's into things that can happen on devices. It's still quite early days, but I think that and like it's going to be quite a challenge to make it work on low, like the kind of devices that are found in many other regions of the world, and not just like fancy phones. But like there is, I think, a lot of work happening there. Great potential.
Great. Well, there's a lot more I would love to talk to you all about, but we're at the hour and I have to be a bit of a benign dictator in wrapping things up. There's lots of other content for Financial Inclusion Week that's getting started. So I just wanted to thank all three of you, Udbhav, Mark, and Kevin, for joining and sharing your perspectives on the challenges but in privacy and privacy by design, but also what's working well and how we might think about translating some of the lessons from other sectors, from the tech space into the inclusive finance space. And so CFI is quite keen in exploring this, and we plan to continue to do work in this area. And so stay tuned for more coming from us, and all of the insights today will certainly inform that. So thank you all so much. Thanks to the audience for participating and your questions, and have a great rest of your first day of Financial Inclusion Week and a great week. Thanks again. Take care.